Hello, everyone. Welcome to Nature Connects, the webinar series that connects you with scientists, experts, and influencers from New England and around the world. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Dan Sarles. I am a trustee of the Massachusetts chapter of the Nature Conservancy and your host for the next hour. Today, we're going to be speaking with Ian Thompson and Claudia Vasquez about the Nature Conservancy's work to save the Amazon in Brazil and Colombia. One of the most urgent challenges we face globally is protecting the Amazon from further deforestation and burning, and TNC is confronting this head-on. I have personally traveled to the Brazilian state of Pará with Ian and witnessed firsthand devastated landscapes, but also TNC's incredible partnerships to protect what remains. And seeing the same in Colombia is next on my travel list. Before we start with today's presentation, let me tell you a little about our guests. Claudia is the director of the Nature Conservancy in Colombia. Before joining TNC, Claudia spent 17 years working in both the public and private sectors, managing international cooperation resources in creating environmental and sustainable development policies. Ian is the executive director of TNC's program in Brazil. He has a rich experience working toward the protection of the Amazon through large-scale conservation on indigenous lands, private properties, and public and private protected areas across the region. He is also an excellent Amazon birding guide. To start us off, we'll hear from Cindy Davis, the Director of Development for TNC's Latin America program. Claudia and Ian will present for about 30 minutes and then take your questions. As you think of questions for Ian and Claudia, please enter them in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. Okay, let's dive in. Welcome, Cindy.
Great, well, thank you. So hello, everyone. I'm Cindy Davis, the Development Director of the Latin America region. And I'm going to give a quick intro on the Amazon before I pass it over to Claudia and Ian to talk about the work we're doing in Colombia and Brazil. First, though, I want to thank all of you for joining us today. And thank you, Dan, for being our host. This work means a great deal to us, and I'm just so excited that all of you are so interested in hearing more about it. So now to begin, we've shared several facts with you on the screen. I always like to start with the size of the rainforest. So what does it look like being the world's largest rainforest? So the Amazon stretches across the continent, touching 9 different countries in South America, covering close to half the South American continent, so roughly 40%. So taking it a step further, if we look at the Amazon rainforest and laid it over North America, it would cover the entire contiguous United States. So I emphasize the size so much because something so magnificently large has significant impact on our planet's health and all of us living on the Earth's surface. So first, looking at the impact in South America alone, 70% of South America's GDP depends on Amazon's climate regulation, which we'll talk a little bit more about later, but this also means that it's one of humanity's biggest leverage points to mitigate climate change. We know today that if we lose another 5 to 10% of the Amazon, the hydrology of the forest may shift, irreversibly changing as much as half of the rainforest into a savanna. So losing half of this enormous rainforest would add tremendous amounts of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, affecting climate change on a global scale. But what hits me more than anything is that this is the home to millions of species. 30% of the world's species are found here. And a good portion of them would be condemned to extinction with the destruction of their habitats within the Amazon. We potentially would risk losing species we haven't even identified yet. So before I get too emotional and too involved in that topic, let's look back at the global importance of the Amazon. So we're going to share a quick video and I'll talk you through a few more highlights. This video is really cool and you can see just how vibrant the Amazon forest is. So looks like we're queuing it up. There we go. Okay, so what are we seeing here? This is a visualization of what is commonly referred to as invisible flying rivers, which are massive air currents that transport water vapor from the Amazon forest and provide rainfall for agricultural production. So more specifically, what we see is water from the Atlantic Ocean evaporates and winds sweep the humidity onto the continent where it falls as rain. The massive amounts of trees from the Amazon suck up groundwater, and they release about 20 billion tons of water into the atmosphere every day. So just to be clear, it's not only receiving water, but it also contributes a significant amount, creating these massive flowing rivers in the sky. So the Amazon is often referred to as the lungs of the planet. But from this video, you can see that it's actually the heart of the planet, pumping the Earth's lifeblood, which is water, out into the atmosphere. This water which feeds the agriculture system, the grain, the cattle, the grain for the cattle, that feeds a significant part of the world. And I hate to point it out, but as the agribusiness encroaches on the Amazon and slashes and burns to make more way for agriculture, it's simultaneously destroying the source of water that is so critical for the agriculture itself. So I'm actually gonna end it there and pass it off to Claudia, who's gonna take us closer to the look at the Colombian Amazon and the people there doing the important work that's to keep this heart beating. All right, so Claudia.
Thank you, Cindy, and thank you, Dan, also for your introduction. I'm really happy to be part of this event. First, let me show you what part of the Amazon our work is focused on. This is Caquetá in the Colombian Amazon, as you can see in the screen. I think, Liz, you need to move to the next. Thank you. The Colombian Amazon is at a pivotal point, and indeed my country is also at a pivotal point. After almost 50 years of internal conflict, the government and the largest guerrilla group signed a peace agreement in 2016. And peace building is a very demanding and challenging process, especially for the Amazon, a region that for decades was occupied by rebel and illegal criminal groups. Our hard-won peace has also come with a hidden cost, unfortunately. Logging, gold mining, and extensive cattle ranching are encroaching into pristine ecosystems that were out of bounds when under the regime of guerrilla groups who occupied these regions. Just to give you an idea, between 2016 and 2017, deforestation doubled in the Amazon region, with around 144,000 hectares deforested, an area almost of the size of London. Yet, peace has also brought a lot of opportunities to us. And these are the stories I like to share with you today. These are stories of hope for all of us at a time when hope is what we all need. For example, in the photo you see in the screen, we see the communities learning how to monitor the forest to protect it. Years ago, we never could imagine something like this was possible. We believe that the stories of the people who live in the Amazon are the best testimonies to understand how change is already taking place. Let me tell you about Luis Valencia, the director of an elementary school located in Cartagena del Chairá in the Caquetá, in the region of the Colombian Amazon. Now, Caquetá is the province where the highest deforestation rate in Colombia. Luis, like many others, was involved in the armed conflict some decades ago. The grandparents of the kids from his school belonged to families who arrived in Caquetá seeking to own land to thrive. Expelled by the conflict and the strong land ownership inequality we unfortunately have in the center of Colombia, they ended up in the rainforest. Struggling to improve their economic situation, they partially cleared the forest, grew illegal crops, and experienced the terrible effects of the war with armed groups ruling the region. Luis is truly a man of his time. And I say this because he has come a long way from the ways as an armed guerrilla. And like the country, he is transforming. Today, he is not only director of a school, he is fully dedicated to promoting conservation efforts. Luis has planned excursions for the school children into the forest and has used the field work to talk about the effects of deforestation for species such as tapir, the giant otter, the woolly monkey, and the jaguar, among others. The children started to monitor and learn about the water sources, animals, and plants, and they take this knowledge into their homes to persuade their parents to change their harmful practices as regard the environment. Let me show you a brief video about this experience where you can see and hopefully feel also how the community is empowered and full of hope as they work for the conservation of the Amazon.
Mi nombre es Verónica Gamboa Morales, curso el grado 9 y vengo aquí a contarles sobre lo que estamos haciendo sobre el PRAIS.
Estamos acá en la sede principal Monserrate, núcleo número 1 Cartagena del Chairá, en nuestra semana ambiental que hace parte del proyecto ambiental escolar PRAES, en el cual todas las sedes educativas, nuestras 14 sedes, nos unimos cada año a mostrar lo que venimos desarrollando en el tema de prevenir la deforestación, en concientizar a nuestros niños, que los niños le den ese mensaje a sus papás, que debemos contribuir a no más deforestación, porque estamos acabando con esta región tan rica en biodiversidad, que los niños desde los hogares están diciendo no más, hay que frenar la deforestación.
Thank you, Liz. So TNC has been supporting the educational activities in Cartagena del Chairá, the area the school is located in. But our approach in the Amazon goes beyond local activities because this is a very complex and multi-layered problem, and no one can find a solution alone. We know we need to stop deforestation and move towards a new area of sustainability where clearing land is not necessary for economic growth. That's why TNC is partnering with indigenous organizations, farmers, governments, NGOs, and the private sector to work on initiatives that help protect the Amazon forest, encourage sustainable supply chains, and restores degraded areas. TNC is working with farmers, guiding them towards diversifying their incomes so they don't see forest clearing as the only way to transform and use these natural environments. In the left-hand photo, we see people still working on their beekeeping projects, even during the pandemic. The other photo shows an agroforestry project where we plant trees along crops to make sure sustainable farming. We are promoting these systems to halt deforestation in the frontiers of the Amazon, where ecosystems are at their most vulnerable because of rapidly expanding agriculture. To date, since 2018, 150 families have incorporated these practices into their food growing systems. Parallel to this, we are working with local leaders and governments to improve governance, planning processes, and decision support tools that impact upon the health of the Amazon. In the left-hand photo, we are taking part in a regional meeting with the governors of the Amazon provinces to exchange experiences and joint efforts to tackle deforestation from this national scale. And of course, as a science-based organization, we are creating knowledge with communities about the biodiversity of their territories. Here we are teaching and learning with farmers from Caquetá how to set camera traps to monitor the presence of jaguars and other mammals in the area. We are convinced that working with people and communities makes conservation be part of the future. Thank you, Dan.
Ian, you're on mute.
So thank you, Dan. Thanks, Claudia. In Brazil, we'll be talking about the state of Pará, the second largest state in the Brazilian Amazon, and the state with the highest rate of deforestation. At the same time, Pará is home to 9% of all the tropical forests on Earth, so there's still a lot, worth saving. It's critical that we stop forest loss in Pará because 40% of deforestation in the Brazilian Amazon is here. And we really need to change the economy really that's based on this deforestation and change it to a sort of low carbon economy, change the development paradigm. I'd like to warm up our conversation today with this video to share with you a tiny bit of the wonders of the Amazon as I saw them myself on a trip I made some months ago. This small selection of images and sounds represents 80% of the forest that is not lost. So as I say, there's just so much still that we can make a difference on. So huge diversity, right? So something we've learned over the years is that Indigenous peoples are fundamental allies if we are to prevent the Amazon rainforest from reaching that perilous tipping point where it would become a savanna and the rain regime that we saw in the video would be altered forever. There would be no going back. So in Brazil, which houses 2/3 of the Amazon rainforest, Indigenous lands are amongst the best preserved. On average, Indigenous territories have even less deforestation than our national parks. Indigenous lands represent 23% of the Brazilian Amazon, which is almost 1/3 of the territory that we need to protect to avoid the tipping point. As most people say, around 75, 80%. So if we support their guardianship, it means that we're almost 1/3 of the way there. So one major focus of our work to protect the Amazon forest in Brazil is our Indigenous strategy. But despite the importance of Indigenous and community-led management of forests, they face significant barriers in Brazil. On top of these, perhaps, is seeing Indigenous people as a barrier to development and the hostile political position that the Brazilian federal government has adopted. Indigenous people need support in strengthening their voice and gaining recognition for their centuries-long capacities to maintain their own well-being and steward their lands. We need to build relationships of mutual trust based on respect for rights. TNC has become the trusted partner of the Indigenous peoples in the Brazilian Amazon over the years, particularly through our relationship with COIABI, which is the main Amazon Indigenous Federation. One of our most important and proudest achievements was the creation with COIABI of the National Policy on Environmental Management of Indigenous Lands in 2012. Policies like these, which bring together government and Indigenous peoples, can only be created with trust. So TNC brings this ability to connect to government, the policymaker, and to Indigenous people who really have to contribute to that policy development to make sure that policy really works for them. So together we created a policy that works for Indigenous people. It took about 10 years of negotiation until the different pieces came together that were willing, to give up the pieces that would actually allow you to reach a negotiated solution. We worked with Brazil's National Indigenous Agency, FUNAI, in 2012 then to determine the tools to plan Indigenous lands management. These tools allow Indigenous people to then communicate how they use and value their lands to Western society, to companies, to NGOs even. So it allows them to express what they really want from their land. So one of the major components of that policy is the Territorial Management Plan that covers both environmental and land management as well as economic development. This photo on the left is an example of Indigenous people doing their plans. So TNC is involved on this on the ground, for example, in Trincheira Bacajá, Indigenous land, 1.6 million hectares. We've helped them do their plan. And with other lands in all, we work on about 6 million hectares with the people. And this allows us to have a deep understanding of their reality in different parts of the Amazon. So it's not just our theory, we're actually learning by doing with them. And by working with government through the policy, and engaging them in that learning, we can really go to scale. And we've had significant success with this. Today, there are 111 different Indigenous lands in Brazil with their plans. That's 57% of the Indigenous land area, 66 million hectares. So that's really, for me, that shows us how we can do our work on the ground, take it through policy, and that's how we're going to get to scale. So although the photo shows men doing the planning, it's from some time ago. And one of the most pleasing things to me and encouraging things is that nowadays women have also become very empowered. The training center we established with Koyabi helped contribute to that because it had a policy for 50% students, women students as well. So I'd like to tell you a little bit about the lady in the other picture, Nara Barre. She was a student from that center, and she's the woman holding the medal for her contribution to human rights. She's now the director of Koyabi, the first woman director of that organization. And she's a remarkable leader and voice for the Indigenous people. And I think that affects not only Brazil, but in the international debate. I think it's a real mark for all of us, really. But it's not just Nara. I could say Joênia Wapachana, that works closely with TNC, was elected a federal deputy in the last elections in Brazil. Sonia Guajara, that is the director of the Brazilian Association of Indigenous Peoples, very vocal in UN debates. Alessandra Munduruku and Puio Tembe have just been elected as the coordinators of the Pará State Indigenous Federation. Lilian Karipuna, who was elected in the recent elections as a local councillor, as well as being the leader of her local organization. So women are really coming forward and helping moving Indigenous people into decision-making spaces, both at the political level and in these sort of fora and debates where they can have their voice. So by supporting and building the voice of Indigenous people and of Indigenous women, we help them to take their rightful place and play very important roles in Indigenous decision-making in broader society. These women are defending Indigenous culture and values, which includes a deep connection between nature and human well-being. One of the biggest challenges to empowering Indigenous peoples is funding. How to empower Indigenous peoples to receive the funding they need to implement what they've planned. At one level, this is about valuing the forests in their lands, where business fundamentals are often the critical bottlenecks for Indigenous people to develop sustainable opportunities on their own independent local economies. An example of this is our work with the Xikrin communities in Pará, who got together and created an organization to harvest their Brazil nuts. They were a new organization with no working capital to move out the middlemen and buy the nut harvest. They could only buy a tiny fraction of the harvest, so it was impossible to negotiate better prices, strengthen their organization, and build their autonomy. So we worked with them to break down these bottlenecks. TNC brought in that funding so the organization could buy almost all of the Brazil nut harvest from the indigenous families in the region, increasing the volume and very successfully improving the whole value chain. So in a sense, what's the secret sauce that enables all of this? In this case, there's working capital. It's about training and infrastructure too, but really it's about organizational and strengthening, which needs that working capital. This is why TNC needs people out on the ground. We need to understand the reality, identify the real bottlenecks, build a whole value chain approach. It's not enough just to go and build the shed to store the nuts if there's no volume coming through. And another example is really another important part of it then is connecting the production to the market. And another example here we see is a wonderful example for me of Indigenous women's contribution to their own well-being, to the well-being of their communities and to conservation. The Shikreen Babasu oil enterprise, Meniri. Babasu is a type of coconut and its oil is used for cooking and also for cosmetics by companies like Natura. TNC has supported the women in improving the processing of the oil, helping them to brand it and get it out to markets. You can get added value because you're branding it as an Indigenous women's initiative and as a contribution to the conservation of the Amazon forest. And this is their brand. They designed it. It's so beautiful. It represents, the facial markings that they use. So it's very much their identity going into their product. And so there's so much talent then that has come from these Indigenous women and so much leadership. And it builds their self-respect and their self-empowerment, if you like. So you can imagine seeing their design on the bottles and knowing that that's going out and people are buying that. This helps their relationship with the outside world. A few years ago when we visited this area with Dan, these women didn't speak Portuguese. They rarely went outside of their lands, more for a medical emergency. Now they're learning Portuguese. They're out there negotiating those products with the dealers. So I hope you've enjoyed hearing a little bit about the work that needs to be done today with Indigenous peoples to protect the Amazon. I'd like to thank you for your support to TNC and extend this opportunity to join us as partners of these Indigenous peoples, not only because of the cultural diversity on our planet, which they represent, but because they are true allies in helping us to save one of the most critical forests for the future of our planet, avoiding the extinction of biodiversity and mitigating climate change. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you, Claudia and Ian. I have a few quick comments and a small request for our audience before we turn it over for Q&A. So based off of what we just heard, we have a big opportunity to work collectively with communities, governments, corporations, and people from all walks of life to stop further loss of the Amazon. So, and by doing this, we can help to avoid irreversibly changing as much as half of the rainforest into a savanna. So our projects are designed to mitigate uncountable extinctions and irreparable harm to the indigenous cultures that are intrinsically tied to the forest. And if our work in the Amazon is successful, we will avoid one of the largest releases of greenhouse gases in history. But we need your help. So today, in addition to any support that you're moved to provide, we'd like to ask you to consider sharing what you've learned with other people. So this is a request to spread the word, whether it's at the dinner table this evening or with a friend over virtual or maybe even in-person coffee if you're lucky enough. We're asking you to commit to spreading the word about our important work and the urgency surrounding the Amazon by maybe the end of this weekend. So we'll be sending the recording of this presentation for reference and a few other resources and materials later today, so you're well equipped for your task. But all of us on this call are resources for you. And if you find yourself with a question a day, a week, or maybe a month from now, never hesitate to reach out to us. And we're happy to discuss anything, anytime. And I want to thank you again. The Nature Conservancy literally cannot do this without your help, without you sharing the word and without others who can make an impact with our work. So now I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to Dan. And I believe we're ready to open up for Q&A. Is that right?
That is correct. Thank you, Cynthia. Claudia, Ian, thank you so much. That was great. I know I learned a lot. We'll get to audience questions. And for the audience, as a reminder, when you think of questions for our guests, please enter them in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. We do already have some coming in. Claudia, first question. Deforestation is a national problem in Colombia, as you mentioned. How is TNC ensuring that different NGOs, local governments, and communities come together to fight deforestation?
Thank you, Dan, for that question. Yes, fortunately enough, TNC has a very good relationship and is very well positioned with the government. Colombia has a national government, as you know, but we also worked with territorial and subnational governments. There is, as from last year, a national law about how to fight the deforestation, because it used to be only a concern from the environmental sector, from the Ministry of Environment and the entities belonging to this ministry. Now it's not the case anymore, and thanks to this, there is a national plan that makes all the other sectors to be involved in this plan. And we as TNC, we are part of this, let's say, roundtable that the government has set. And within this roundtable, we do participate with other NGOs, both internationals as similar to TNC, but also local ones, because we are convinced that we need also, and more specifically, to work with our partners in the country. So we do work at different levels, at national level, but also at territorial level with the communities and with other NGOs to make sure that we can provide solutions to the communities, and that they don't have the need to clear the forest, as I mentioned during my presentation.
Great, thank you, Claudia. Ian, the World Economic Forum's Global Risk Report has identified nature as the most probable and impactful risk in the world. How does this affect Brazil's position, and where do you see opportunities?
Thanks, Dan. I think this is very important for, I think especially for the private sector, voice. The Brazilian government position, the Brazilian has a fairly radical position, and I think other voices coming in that help influence, their policy positions are very important. And the World Economic Forum producing a report like that, identifying these as the major risks, brings or reinforces really what has been a trend of investors expressing concern over Brazil's lack of attention, let's say, to environmental protection of the Amazon in particular, and its attitude to indigenous peoples as well, sort of social and sort of environmental safeguards. So I think it's very important that this sort of report comes out and makes that a clear statement and a clear priority. So it helps create an enabling environment, a more favorable environment for trying to influence the government.
Great, thank you, Ian. Two questions have come in that are sort of connected to each other. One from Gordon: what can committed individuals in the U.S. do to support Amazonian conservation other than monetary, things that will have real impact? And then from Kim, connected to that, what role can ecotourism play as a partial solution? So I wonder if either of you have thoughts on those areas.
Yeah, I'm happy to have a quick thought on that. I think the whole idea of, consumer choice and depending on everyone has their, has their own life but there are opportunities in terms of, what you buy and how careful you are in terms of what its impact has been. There's more and more transparency coming to supply chains and allowing consumers to make those choices. And I think more and more also a trend to transparency around investment and companies and actually funds and so on that are backing up those companies. So I think for me, that's probably the easiest and most impactful thing to be having a look at. You know, people that are investing, people that are and consuming. We can all do that.
Claudia?
Yes, so thank you, Dan. And I totally agree with Ian's comment. I think sustainable production is important, is very important, but it's also very important sustainable consumption. We also need to work on that. And of course, to make this possible, consumers need information. And this is something where we do work also. We have reached in the Amazon region, for instance, some agreements with the private sector, agreements on zero deforestation for the production of meat and others. But a part of the agreement with them is that we need to let people know what they are doing on the ground, because otherwise you can have a very interesting product that with this added value, great added value in terms of zero deforestation. But if the consumer doesn't know, so it's not that easy to support this kind of behaviors.
Great, thank you, Claudia. Claudia, this question probably more pertains to the situation in Colombia from Becky. Has the situation in Venezuela affected your work in Colombia? I understand the political situation there has been detrimental to conservation efforts in that country, gold mining in the rainforest, and obviously being on the border there. Is that an issue in Colombia?
Thank you, Becky, for that question. Yes, I would say that, well, first of all, it has impacted our participation, physical participation in Venezuela. TNC has not an office there anymore. And the impact we have here in Colombia is more located in the Orinoquia region, meaning more to the northeast part of the country, where actually the frontier with Venezuela is much more bigger, and where actually the ecosystems are very similar. Within as far as the Amazon is concerned, I would say that in the Venezuelan Amazon, close to Colombia, there is a quite good conservation strategy already built for many years in terms of protected areas. So it doesn't really affect our border, our frontier with Colombia. I would say that illegal mining, it's more a mutual problem and big concern that we do have with Brazil more than with Venezuela, especially with Brazil and also a little bit with Ecuador. But yes, it does has an effect, but more in the Orinoquia region, not that much in the Amazon.
Great, thank you. Two questions that come in that are related, one from Nick and then another one. Nick asks, what is the percentage of the Amazon forest that has been lost and how successful are methods to grow it back? Is there an estimate on what percentage is the tipping point? And the other question connected to that is, are there examples of reclamation of forest or efforts exclusively focused on prevention of deforestation? So that can be for both of you.
Sure, I can start with that. Deforestation at the moment is at about 17–18% across the Amazon. Estimates are very rough, let's say approximate around what the tipping point is, but generally it has been moving sort of to being closer. We're closer to it. So I think the latest are even 20 to 30% clearance would be a problem. Would be the tipping point might be 20%, it might be 25%. It's probably before 30%. So I don't think we have any better science than that. Restoration is part of the effort. I think part of it is that often clearance is actually not very economic, and so there's actually abandonment and natural restoration can be quite significant in Brazil, millions of hectares. And so how you then secure that natural regeneration is something we're looking at. And then actually reforesting as well, so that, you know, a lot of the land cleared is not under productive use, and how you can then restore that. And we're looking at economic restoration options like agroforestry systems. So yes, it is part of what we do.
In the case of Colombia, yes, I think it's hard to have like a clear percentage of that when we're going to reach that tipping point. I would say that the Colombian Amazon is quite well protected in a percentage of around 60 to 65% of the Colombian Amazon is pretty much well protected. The pressure on deforestation is more in the region that is close to the Andes, because this is where there is more human settlement. So this is where the most of the pressure is. One of the strategies we have implemented, as I told before, is to work with local communities and locally indigenous communities, because given to these communities the opportunities to know their territories much better, and actually to apply the knowledge they have about the territories, to give them back the opportunity to live from the forest as they used to do, is one of the most successful strategies to halt deforestation, because there is less and less pressure over the forest if people actually go back to their knowledge, to what they knew what to do. And strategies like agroforestry and others, as we mentioned before, is also a way of restore the land. So it provides to the opportunity to continue restoring the Amazon region.
Great, thank you, Claudia and Ian. Annalise asks, what is the long-range expectation of the US re-entry into the Paris Climate Agreement pertaining to the world's rainforests? Sort of how is the Amazon affected when the US pulled out, and following that, you know, US rejoining, how is that helpful?
In Brazil, I think the relationship, you know, how that affects Brazil's government positions is for me the important part of that. And so it has made an enormous difference. Like we're seeing Brazil, intense negotiations between Brazil and the US at the moment in sort of resetting the relationship. And obviously the commitment to climate and recognition of the science behind climate change has been really important to a Brazilian government that has denied that in the past. So I think that for me is the main change, that we're changing the context for the Brazilian government.
Yes, well, for the case of Colombia, well, this change in the politics in the US, it's a very good news in terms of international cooperation, of course, because this is, and we can see actually this change to start having good results very soon. We already know that entities like USAID have already set like a very specific focus on Colombian Amazon, because they know that in terms of the goals that the country has of complying with the national NDCs of the Paris Agreement, making the Amazon to continue being preserved and stopping the deforestation is almost a need, a must, to make possible that Colombia meets the level of ambition that it has set within the Paris Agreement.
Great, thank you both. Another question. How has technological innovation, an example being drones, assisted TNC efforts in both countries?
Do you want to go ahead, Claudia?
Well, I would say that we do have developed here in Colombia a system that we call it CIMA, which is a tool that provides a lot of information to any organization or any person that needs to engage in a decision process in the territory. We have applied that methodology in principle for rivers for the Magdalena River in Colombia, which is one of the biggest rivers in the world. But that methodology can actually be also applied for the Amazon, and we are actually trying to start developing this for the Amazon too, because we have noticed that we have focused very much on deforestation, on the importance of forests in the Amazon, but we haven't given that much importance to rivers also. So this methodology, which is very sophisticated actually, can actually also be used in the rivers in the Amazon. And essentially it consists on making scenarios on how the Amazon rivers and the forest can actually change if there are infrastructure projects to be built, if deforestation continues, if with all the different hypotheses of what can actually happen in the territory. And it shows you how the Amazon would like if those events actually happen. Yes, it is an essential part of our work.
Yeah, and we do training with drones, for example, for the Indigenous Agency and Indigenous organizations. And I'm very interested in a new thing where they put in sort of sound detectors in the forest. And so you can imagine the chainsaw makes a noise and you get alerted to it. So there's a lot of innovation going on. I think innovation is key. I think the other part is that we believe a lot in the bioeconomy, that, we have to create value from the forest. And I think innovation and technology is what's going to make the difference in that. Like, people have known about the potential of the Amazon forest, for years and years and years, but it hasn't been realized. And I think innovation, technology has to be the key to that.
Great, thank you both for that. Noel asks, and this is probably on a lot of people's minds, how has COVID affected the Amazon region and your respective works?
Well, at the beginning of the pandemic, I think that the Colombian Amazon was very much affected, and it was like a very, it was critical, really, really critical, because of course those are regions not very easy to reach by the government. So of course that was a major problem. What it has been implemented in the country is that, of course, we avoid any contact with indigenous communities because of their vulnerability. And this is something that we TNC, we have applied very strictly, not to bring the virus to their communities. But I think there is something very interesting to let you know, is that some of those communities, they have actually applied their ancestral knowledge. And in some cases, they have actually limited the cases of COVID, because they've been applying their traditional knowledge, using, of course, resources from the forest. And it has been quite interesting to see how this has actually functioned for them. a lot.
Yeah, and I think in Brazil, it's been tragic, really, the loss of leadership, the loss of indigenous people, the loss of the elders has been tragic. It's, people we work with are now gone, and even a former indigenous leader that used to work with TNC passed away from COVID. So it's been very strong for us, and we've been, as Claudia says, we immediately stopped working directly with indigenous people. I think it has been widespread. It has been very impactful, and now they are a priority for vaccination under the Brazil program, and I think we've been working a little bit on how we can help them document, their elder knowledge and make sure that that knowledge passes on, as well as strengthening communication systems so that, health advice and so on gets out to everybody, and again, everyone's aware of what the different programs and responses are. This is not only as a COVID response, but obviously as helps environmental issues as well. So yeah, COVID has been dramatic.
Thank you both. Another question, are non-Indigenous landowners of rainforest areas amenable to sale to TNC? And I guess the real question is buyback a realistic strategy?
That's an interesting one. At a sort of traditional philanthropy type scale, no, like the scales we're talking about here are far too big. But I think what's interesting to me is, as a sort of carbon market evolves and we look at carbon as an asset in these forested lands, then there are people looking at buying land for the carbon value. And if that sort of market is viable and takes off, then you could be looking at the possibility of acquiring at a larger scale land. And then the question would be whether you obviously have to steward that land to get that carbon value, right? To get the carbon credit, you have to maintain the carbon. And then the question would be whether Indigenous peoples and local communities would not be excellent stewards for that land. So maybe there's some potential through that sort of arrangement. But in general, no. And I thought there was a question around land value, and what we see is land value increasing because beef prices are increasing, and that's really, a lot of cleared land goes to pasture, and because that has made beef more economic, then actually the forest part of it has also increased in value as well. So in general, I think it's not a strategy for us, and certainly not a philanthropy strategy. But I'm interested in the carbon.
Yes, same here. And there is another, let's say, particular condition to many of the land in the Colombian Amazon is that most of the Colombian Amazon belongs to indigenous communities. So of course, buying land wouldn't be possible because this is a constitutional protection that we have in the country. But of course, in terms of carbon market, as Ian was mentioning, there are some ideas and some possibilities there as far as the local communities and indigenous communities are actually beneficiaries of the market. But no, it is not a strategy that TNC would promote here in the country anyway.
Okay. We are approaching the end of our time today. Both Ian and Claudia, do you have any final thoughts you'd like to share, and perhaps how people can learn more about your work?
Dan, thank you. No, I just like to say that it is, I mean, the problem or the challenges in the Amazon are so big that it's not possible only for TNC to find the solution. We need really to position TNC as the one that helps to integrate and to coordinate a lot of efforts, local efforts to regional efforts. So this is what I like to close with this. I know there are other questions on the chat that I will take the time to respond to all of them. Thank you.
Yeah, and yeah, I'd just like to add that in agreement really that it's about placing Indigenous people within the Amazon context and helping them really, contribute to the future of the Amazon and empowering them to do that. And we see a lot of the problems of the Amazon, but I just like to encourage people that there still is a lot of the Amazon here. There still is, it's still worth making this effort, and Indigenous people are great allies in that story, but not on their own either. It is part of the different players that are in the landscape.
Great. Yeah, thank you both. I mean, obviously it's an incredible challenge. Well, thank you, Claudia and Ian, for your time today and your efforts in general for joining us today. And thank you to everyone who tuned in for your support of the Nature Conservancy. Your support is what makes all of this amazing work possible. We will be sending everyone a follow-up email over the coming days with links to the resources we talked about today and a recording of this webinar. Additionally, if we did not get to your question live today, we will be answering all questions via email. If you are enjoying these webinars, please share them with your friends or donate to TNC via the link in the chat. You can also follow us on Facebook and Instagram at conserve_MA to keep up with our work and get updates on upcoming virtual opportunities to connect with us. Please join us on March 4th for a discussion with acclaimed scientist Dr. Bill Muma, one of the world's leading experts in international environmental policy. A longtime trustee of TNC in Massachusetts, Dr. Muma currently serves as Professor Emeritus of International Environmental Policy at the Fletcher School at Tufts University. Dr. Muma will discuss how forests are essential for tackling climate change, and present astounding findings from his latest research collaboration, and talk about how he's linking the size of trees to ongoing forest management practice. As always, you can find the latest webinar schedule and register at nature.org/MA-webinars. Thank you again, Ian and Claudia, and thank you all for joining us. And everyone, please have a wonderful afternoon and be safe. Bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.